Well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Massimo Perrino from the UCLG World Secretariat. Welcome to this virtual dialogue between the independent group of scientists for the 2023 Global Sustainable Development Report and representatives from local and regional governments, co-organized between the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments, facilitated by UCLG, and UNDESA. Welcome. And just a few technical remarks. Please note we have interpretation in English, Spanish, and French. Please keep your camera on if possible. And when you are not speaking, please ensure to be muted. So, well, over to my Secretary General, Emilia Saiz, to formally welcome and kick off this session. Thank you, and over to you, Emilia.
Well, thank you very much, Massimo. Welcome, everybody. It is very, very interesting for me to see this group gathering today because we feel that this is a very important step towards the Sustainable Development Goals Summit. You know, our international municipal movement that is gathered in the Global Task Force has always been very adamant about the need to connect science and specific knowledge and experience with decision-making and policy. And this is not an easy thing to do, and those that are local leaders know that this is the case, and this is why when an opportunity is given to us to actually comment on a report that is prepared by scientists about a topic that really touches our day-to-day work, and the Sustainable Development Goals do that, and development in general does that, then I think it is something remarkable, and it is a very important milestone for us, for our movement, and for the way that we dialogue with the international community. So, as you know, the Global Sustainable Development Report was first mandated within the framework of the Future We Want. And it was decided by the member states that this would be produced regularly every 4 years. And it is very relevant that now this independent group of scientists is mandated to produce this new report that is going to be feeding into the discussions of the summit on the Sustainable Development Goals that we are all working towards in September. When we discussed with our colleagues from UNDESA about the steps that we had to undertake to reach the summit, including the preparation of the high-level political forum and everything that we do to bring the voices of local and regional governments to the process. This was one of the highlights. This was one of the new things that brought us closer to influencing the understanding that needs to inform international policy. And when we thought about doing this session, what we thought is, okay, then let us bring the people together that are actually informing our political leaders day after day on those international processes. And I think we have an incredible group of practitioners that have the ears of decision makers at local level and that are going to be providing their opinions. So I really look forward to hearing from them. A couple of comments on the report that we have received, and I'm not going to present the background of the report because I'm sure that Lotta Tatihem, the Chief of Outreach and Partnership Branch Division of UNDESA, will give a better framework than I would be able to deliver. But I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts of what we thought was interesting about the approach of the report as we know it. And that is something that usually happens to us, not only with this report, but when we talk to the international community, we usually face the fact that they see local and regional governments mainly as implementer of policies. And so when we find ourselves delivering positions, we usually need to defend the role that we need to fulfill, not only as implementers, but also as shapers of policy, right? And I think it is something important for us to take into account when we provide feedback today. And it's also something that we will need to work towards within the framework of the local and regional governments forum that we are co-organizing with UNDESA, UN Habitat, UNDP, and others within the framework of the high-level political forum. We have not really improved the notion that local and regional governments are a sphere of government that do not only implement policies, but that can actually shape the type of policies that we need to meet many of the targets that are linked with the Sustainable Development Goals and with Agenda 2030 in general. And also, from my perspective, the role of local service provision in achieving the agenda is also not put maybe under focus as it should be. There are interesting references to the role of local and regional governments, but from our perspective, there is probably too little on that role as political actors, and also on the link between service provision and the targets of the SDGs. So I'm very curious to see how others feel about it, and how how that presentation of the report will feed or not into these thoughts. I will stop here from my side because I want to hear the rest of you, and I would like to give the floor to Lotta. Lotta Tattinen, thank you very much for being with us, Lotta, for our partnership, for really supporting the voice of local and regional governments in the international processes, and in particular the whole localization concept around the Sustainable Development Goals. The floor to you. Thank you, my dear friend.
Thank you so much, Emilia. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. It's such a pleasure for me to be here, and I will keep it fairly short because we are very happy to have with us our dear colleague Astra Bonini, who has been leading the work on the Global Sustainable Development Report in DESA. And she will be giving you shortly a presentation about this report. And she's really the best person we can imagine that can share the key messages with you. But just by a few remarks from my end. Indeed, as you mentioned, Emilia, this report, the Global Sustainable Development Report, is issued once every 4 years. So it is really a cornerstone seminal report that the UN receives. And it is, of course, prepared by an independent group of scientists that have been appointed by the Secretary General. The current group of scientists have very much endorsed the report that was prepared by the previous group in 2019. So if you have not done that yet, I would suggest that you take a close look at that report as well. And I'll be asking my colleagues to provide a link in the chat box, because these two reports really should be read in tandem for you to have a complete, full understanding of the recommendations. So this report has been the product of extensive consultations by the scientists. It has been released in an advance unedited form with governments and stakeholders for the purpose of informing the intergovernmental negotiations on the outcome document of the SDG summit that is currently being negotiated. The final version of the report will be launched just ahead of the SDG summit, And we also expect the SDG Summit to hear directly from the scientists the main recommendations that are contained in the report. So with those few opening remarks, let me now give the floor to Astra, who can really give us an in-depth view about the report, the recommendations, and importantly, the way forward on this report. Over to you, Astra.
Thank you so much, Lotta, and thank you, Amelia and UCLG, for bringing colleagues together to discuss the report. It's very much an open conversation where we're looking forward to hearing about what you're doing and what you would like to get out of the report and how it would be most useful. And we'll present a little bit about what's in the report. Apologies, we will have one of the scientists coming in the second hour to participate in a dialogue, but we had a few last minute changes where one of our scientists wasn't available in this first hour. I've been working with the scientists over the past 4 years, so hopefully I can go ahead and give you a sneak peek at what is in the report and what you might find that could be useful from your work and your perspectives. And it was nice to hear Amelia from the beginning. It's not just about implementation at the local level, but about shaping what we see as transformation and what policies are put forward that can really have those impacts across regions and across communities toward the SDGs. Next slide, please. So the Global Sustainable Development Report, as Lotta mentioned, it's written by a group of 15 independent scientists. It's been envisioned for some time, even coming out of Rio +20, and then there was a call for the report to be produced in the 2030 agenda. So the 2030 agenda called for 2 reports. The Global Sustainable Development Report to be a scientific assessment of the state of the SDGs, challenges, opportunities, and really strengthen the role of evidence and science in informing policy for sustainable development. The other report is the Secretary General's report on progress toward the SDGs, which gives an overview using the intergovernmental data process for what the trends are on SDGs, so that it's a bit easier to see where we are and how far we have to go on the SDGs. The GSDR builds on other assessments, so it's meant to be an assessment of assessments. It's not necessarily that the scientists come together to produce new research, but they really reach out broadly across the scientific communities everywhere in the world to compile the state-of-the-art analysis that's taking place on the SDGs across many different communities. Next slide, please. So in 2016, there was the outcome of the high-level political forum called for this report to be written by 15 independent scientists that would be nominated by the Secretary General. And this is really an emphasis on getting the scientific perspective from outside the UN, from a broad range of scientists in the natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, in all regions, with good gender balance. And so there's a different group for each of the reports. There was one group nominated to write the 2019 report. And then in 2020, a new group of scientists were nominated by the Secretary General to write the 2023 report. The co-chairs are Mr. Jaime Miranda of Peru, a medical doctor, and Ms. Imme Schulz of Germany, a social scientist. And then there are representatives from biology, from climate science, from demography, from economics. So we really have a broad multidisciplinary group, which of course is so important for the SDGs because these goals cut across sectors, they cut across different bodies of science that would need to feed in to really inform what are some policies that could be most effective in implementing the SDGs. Next slide, please. The process of the GSDR is also quite extensive and inclusive in terms of reaching out across the scientific community. Of course, there are 15 scientists. They're representative of many different disciplines, different regions, but it's still 15. And so they really need to reach out broadly to hear about specific analysis in different communities and in different regions to inform the report. So they start the process with a call for inputs once they have a general sense of the types of materials they might need for the report. And we made that call. We had over 175 submissions from 40 plus countries that came in to inform the report. A little bit later in the process, once there's a solid outline and even a zero draft, an initial draft, the scientists participate in regional consultations. So these are meant to be 2 to 3 day workshops where different experts from the region come together and really dig in and talk about the key issues for the SDGs in their region and some of the science and analysis and evidence that they're producing or that they're aware of that could be useful for feeding into the report. This report benefited from consultations in Australia, China, and Japan. These were virtual consultations, and then in-person consultations were held in Malawi, Peru, Philippines, Qatar, and Senegal. So a lot of really enriching material was gathered through those consultations. There's also a peer review, and this is on an early draft where the scientific community reads the draft with offering constructive criticism and a eye to the rigor and quality of the report and the evidence base to pinpoint what needs to be improved, what's missing, what needs to be brought in. We benefited from support from the International Science Council to organize this peer review so that it was done external to our group at the UN and to the independent group of scientists to really make this an independent peer review process. We had, I believe, around 104 reviewers who read the report and provided feedback. So it's really a process of reaching out very broadly within the scientific and expert community to build up to this report. Which is one of the reasons that it takes place every 4 years, so that there's time to really go through this process of outreach. Next slide, please. So just to jump now into what's in the report. One of the key findings and the headlines that shaped what the scientists wanted to do with the report is the idea that transformation is possible. So we take that as a given, and it's also inevitable. So the question is, how can transformation be shaped in a direction that is towards sustainability and equity? Because transformations can take place leading in all kinds of different directions, and it takes active engagement to guide them toward an outcome that is in line with the SDGs. Next report, please, or next slide. So this is kind of a big picture, building on the statistics produced by the UN Statistics Division. At the halfway point to 2030, where are we? And when you look at the figure on the left-hand side of the screen, for the most part, there's not a lot of green. Green reflects those targets where generally the goal is likely to be achieved by 2030. Yellow, there's been some progress, but it's not fast enough to achieve the goals by 2030. Orange, there's been very little progress, or it's been a bit flat since 2015. So not a lot has been achieved. And then red, those are the targets where it's actually been moving backwards in the wrong direction. This is a selection of the targets. There's not data available for all of them, of course, so it doesn't reflect all of the SDG targets. But the key takeaway is we're really in trouble. This has been a result both of the crises of COVID-19, of the war in Ukraine, inflation, cost of living crisis, all of these coming together. But even the 2019 report, and I'm glad that Lotte mentioned that that was a good one to read as well, said that we were not going to achieve the SDGs if things continued as they were. So it's not quite accurate to say that these crises derailed progress and we were kind of on track before, because that wasn't the case. There's also a growing gap between high and low income countries that's really come out stronger in the past several years with the different crises. And this is all a signal that there are future crises to be expected, the scientists say, unless urgent action is taken to build resilience through SDG implementation, that SDGs can be seen as a way to prevent the severity of future crises or manage them better or avoid them altogether. So at the end of looking at this data and the general lay of the land on how we're doing on the SDGs, the scientists conclude that business as usual pathways toward transformation will not get us to the goals by 2030, and transformation and game-changing interventions are needed. Next slide, please. The scientists develop a number of frameworks for how to shape the future in the direction that would lead towards sustainability and equity. They build on the frameworks presented in the 2019 report, and I'll cover that a bit later. And all of this really is built on the large body of evidence that they collected that I discussed earlier, where they had reached out and really done a bit of a huge review of all of the research that's taking place on the SDGs. Next slide, please. This was a message in the 2019 report, and it continues to be a message in the 2023 report, is that the links between different SDGs really have to be part of the implementation plan, that to not think about SDGs and how they're related to one another can really slow down progress, because the trade-offs aren't taken into account, the potential impacts of investing in one area without thinking about how that might affect other areas can be very detrimental. In this report, there has been quite a bit of research that's taken place on SDG interlinkages since the 2019 report was published. So there's new analysis, new evidence in the report on the specific nature of the interlinkages. And I'll just share a few of those findings. One is that the way that the SDGs link to one another varies across contexts. So it's not enough at the global level to say, if you take action in this area, it may have this impact in another area. It really needs to be localized within different regions, within different communities, even within different social groups. And one of the findings was that there are generally more trade-offs in high-income countries than there are in low and middle-income countries, where there's generally a higher share of synergies. So investing in the SDGs in low and middle-income countries is likely to produce more synergies across the SDGs, where there are more trade-offs to be taken into account in the higher income countries. Another finding is that synergies are found to be higher for female, younger, and rural populations, where trade-offs are more negligible. So that was really that progress on a given SDG indicator for these groups will generally foster progress for the group on other SDG indicators. Kind of a policy implication for that is investing in some of these groups is likely to have knock-on effects on other SDGs that are positive. One of the calls to action in the report, based on these general findings, is that carrying out context-specific analysis of SDG interlinkages should be incentivized to guide priority setting, so that at the local level in different regions, there's support for analysis that can be used for policymaking on how the SDGs are interlinked. In this case, closer collaboration between science and policy would help to ensure that there is a good evidence base and that is being made available to policymakers. And then there's another element of this interlinkages is spillovers, international spillovers, where progress in an SDG in one country, if it doesn't take into account how that might impact other countries, for example, consuming high carbon products in one country where they're produced somewhere else and the emissions are taking place somewhere else, isn't necessarily counted in the SDG progress. And so one of the requests of the scientists was to institutionalize some sort of SDG analysis at the national level that does take into account those spillovers. Next slide, please. This idea of interlinkages came up in 2019, and one of the innovations of that report was to point toward entry points for transformation. So the 2019 report identified 6 areas where interventions could really tap into interlinkages among the SDGs and accelerate progress. And the 2023 report carries those entry points forward, still identifying them as areas of intervention that could be particularly effective in implementing across the set of 17 SDGs. Those are human well-being and capabilities, sustainable and just economies, sustainable food systems and nutrition patterns, energy decarbonization with universal access, urban and peri-urban areas, and the global environmental commons. And I know this figure is a little bit difficult to see, but these are the headings that are at the top of each column. And then there are 5 rows, and these are levers. This is more who is going to bring about transformation. And this group of scientists added a 5th lever to the 4 that were in the 2019 report. The 5th lever that was added is capacity building. This group saw capacity building as being very crucial to bring about any transformation in any of these 6 areas. And that would be a lever that matches up with governance, finance and economy, individual and collective action, and science and technology. Those were the 4 levers in the 2019 report. This report shows new evidence of how these levers should work together. That was another call in 2019, that these different levers can't be applied in silos, but really need to be cohesive, and there needs to be communication across groups so that everyone can be aligned in achieving the SDGs and working in the same direction instead of being counterproductive, which can happen sometimes. Next slide, please. A new framework innovation for the 2023 report is to look at the phases of transformation. The 2019 report called for transformation through these entry points, but how to actually bring about transformation is a very complicated question, and this report digs in a little bit more specifically to the process of transformation. And there's a technical analysis, usually technologies, there's an S curve where the technology emerges in the beginning, it's not very, very widely used. Then there are incentives, there's an acceleration where the technology starts to spread more widely. And then finally, there's stabilization, where it becomes the new normal, everyone's using the technology. So they applied this more broadly than just technology to look at policies, institutions, any kind of innovation that could have a potential positive effect on the SDGs. And there's a lot of analysis in the report on different impediments to moving along that S-curve, how to overcome those impediments, how to apply the 5 levers to accelerate the pickup of any kind of promising technologies or solutions. And I won't take you through all of those details, but they are in the report. And I think depending on your area of work or what types of solutions you're trying to bring into kind of the mainstream, it can be helpful to understand the impediments and how to go about tackling those. The red line is unsustainable technologies, institutions, social norms. And so at the same time that there are incentives and support for promising initiatives, there has to be an accompanying approach to how to phase out unsustainable processes. And I think that the just transitions approach is something that the scientists discussed quite a bit, in that there can be promising solutions, but if people's livelihoods and their lives are dependent on the unsustainable process, there has to be support to help with that transition and break down the unsustainable process. Next slide, please. There's a chapter in the report that's a call to action, where all of this analysis and evidence that's presented in the earlier chapters is kind of reviewed to say, okay, great. I mean, this is really useful evidence, but what should policymakers do? What should decision makers do? What should different stakeholders try to do to bring about the types of transformation that are discussed in the report? There are several, and I would encourage everyone to take a look at the report. One is establishing an SDG transformation framework for accelerated action. And this is a call not just to look at how to bring the SDGs into national planning and sub-regional planning, but how to look at it from a transformation perspective, and how to look at taking different levers, making them work together, using the analysis of interlinkages, using the S-curve and the understanding of different policies that are needed depending on where in the transformation curve a certain solution or technology or institution sits, and really working through that. So the scientists called for transformation frameworks that use science-based tools and integrate all of the SDGs into that planning. There's a call for capacity building, and this cuts across all countries. It's not just a developing country capacity building focus, but that all countries need to be better equipped to consider the SDGs and the complexity that they bring. So horizontal integration of institutions, as well as vertical integration, training on data collection and analysis, training on understanding the interlinkages literature and developing models to forecast potential outcomes. So really a change in how the SDGs are viewed and how policy is developed around the SDGs. There's also a call for improving the underlying conditions of SDG implementation. And here there's a focus on marginalized groups, ensuring fiscal space, and preventing conflict. Conflict prevention came up as we were having the regional consultations. The war in Ukraine was kind of just having the impacts that it is, but there was a discussion at the regional consultations that many regions are dealing with conflict and have for quite some time. And so this needs to be part of a broader discussion of how to build peace, reduce conflict as a basis for approaching the SDGs. And that came out quite a bit in the discussions. There are calls to work with science, and the reality is that with R&D and with the production of a lot of the analysis that the scientists are using, it's concentrated, whether in the private sector, whether in the developed countries. And so support for research and analysis in all regions is really crucial when you consider that a lot of the relationships among the SDGs are context specific. So having a strong support and a strong body of evidence across the global south and in different regions was a call that the scientists made. I'll go to the next slide, please. There were analysis of, there's a lot of scenario research, and one of the topics that the scientists looked at was the whole body of scenario research that projects kind of under certain assumptions, what's the likelihood of achieving the SDGs. So they synthesized all of this and looked at the entry points, the 6 entry points, to see if we use this scenarios literature and the recommendations there, but we fit that into the 6 entry points, are there some promising ways forward that could really feed into transformation? Getting into the details of very specific policy recommendations. So I just put up here the entry point on sustainable urban and peri-urban development and some of the key shifts towards sustainable development that are coming out across the literature on scenarios. So there's a focus on municipal waste and the circular economy, implementing mandates for electric vehicles, increasing demand and provision of public transport, the rollout of good practices and climate policies for transport and waste, and investing in innovation to reduce plastic and solid waste, increasing water access and having untreated wastewater, cutting in half, not having. Anyway, in any case, there's a lot of information in the report on each of these entry points that lists some of the specific initiatives that would really help to boost progress through those entry points. Next slide, please. The positive news, and this kind of goes back to the first graph where you could see just how far off track the SDGs are. The findings as well indicate that there's a lot more engagement and awareness of the SDGs. And so this sort of points toward, if the evidence base is growing, there's more material pointing toward what works and what doesn't work in terms of policy implementation for the SDGs. And there's also rising awareness and commitment to the SDGs from governments, academia, civil society, local governments. Across the board, there's just generally been a pickup in the SDGs as we approach the halfway point. And this shows a lot of promise in terms of how to harness those aspirations and commitments and feed in the evidence of what works and really bring all these stakeholders together. Then the second half of the 2030 agenda really could lead toward an acceleration and a takeoff where a lot gets done in a short amount of time. And this is something that the scientists they came away with a hopeful view of what might be possible in the next 7 to 8 years. Next slide, please. The report, as Lotte said, will be launched just before the SDG Summit, and the scientists are looking forward to engaging at the summit to vocally, advocate for the use of science and evidence in the SDGs. This is a moment where it's really crucial to make the right decisions, and science and evidence can be an instrumental part of making sure that the decisions that are made are pointing in the right direction for the SDGs. So the summit is really a moment to use the body of evidence for different stakeholders to come together to push for commitments that are going to accelerate the transformations that are needed in the right direction, recognizing that if the transformations aren't shaped, there will be transformations anyway. They just may be in a different direction than we would hope for the right outcomes. And then it's a chance for this call for an SDG transformation framework for accelerated action to be discussed and pick up and start to inform next steps and the way forward. Next slide, please. I'll conclude there, and thank you very much for the attention. We will have Åsa Persson joining shortly in about 15 minutes. She's one of the scientists writing the report from the Stockholm Environment Institute, and I know she'll be very happy to provide more detailed information about any of these slides. And again, encourage everyone to watch for the report. Your feedback and questions will be helpful not only for this report, but it is every 4 years. There will be a report in 2027, and that will be an important moment, again, to reflect on what is working, what's not working, and how things could be done differently. So I thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Astra, for this very interesting presentation. I am sure that everyone really enjoyed understanding how the process is coming about, and also the perspective on the main conclusions that have been reached. I think it is really important, the emphasis that also the report is putting in the complex emergencies that we need to face, and the emphasis on the backlash that we are suffering, and that will make it very difficult to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. I think that from the perspective of local and regional governments, and I'm sure we will hear the panel with feedback talking about it as well. I think it's very important to also acknowledge that a lot of the backlash that we are suffering is human made. So yes, you have climate change, which is human made to the most part, but also beyond the climate change provoke crises like populations that needs to move, etc. We are also not managing that human mobility well. We are also not ensuring that people can behold their rights. Women and girls are losing rights every day, everywhere. As you said, capacity building is needed because the investment is not going to the right places. And I think that some of that intelligence, of this knowledge emanating from the experiences of local and regional governments, which are the sphere of government closest to the people, are very, very important for the coming report, but also for the process that we are going to be feeding into, for the discussions at the high-level political forum and at the Sustainable Development Goals Summit. Let us think about our inputs towards this process as one stepping stone. We are also presenting a high impact actions that we are promoting, and I think overall what we are trying to show is how transformative it can be, to that the transformative framework that the scientists but also other international actors are proposing. How important it is to have a localization perspective of that, and how relevant the voluntary local reviews can be in this, and the voluntary subnational reviews. So I really hope that comes up in the discussion that we are coming next. And I have emphasized how important it will be to pay a specific attention to women, girls, I would say some minorities like the LGBTIQ minority, and therefore it is not a coincidence that all the panelists that we have invited for the first round are women today, and this does not happen very often that we manage to pull this together, but it is with an intention. So I am very pleased that my colleague Lucy Slack, Secretary General of the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, is with us to facilitate this diverse group of women that are part of policy making, and that are following the international perspectives and the international policy making processes, but linking them up to the local and territorial policy making. So Lucy, thank you for being with us. I hope you found the first segment interesting, and we are in your hands for the second segment.
Thank you very much, Emilia, and thank you, Lotta and Astra, for those two presentations, which I think have really framed the discussion that we're going to have today brilliantly well and so succinctly, because we know, having worked on the global development agenda collectively as a group of local government global organizations since 2013, we know just how much work, how much consultation, how much energy and effort goes into bringing together such a rich pool of experts. So thank you so much for sharing that with us in the first instance. And it's great to welcome you to this dialogue, which in many ways brings together a little bit our scientists and our experts. Exactly as Emilia has said, some of our colleagues who are involved in directly supporting local policymakers, local leaders, directly as local government associations in terms of amplifying the voice of local government in their countries to make sure that awareness is raising as equally across countries as it is in some of the bigger cities. As you said, Astra, in terms of, the sort of the multiplier effect and the levers that we can use to really make sure that we get the message out. So I think as a group, as the Global Task Force, as local government organizations that are committed to delivering the SDGs, we really appreciate that. Two other things particularly resonated with me before we get into the panel, but I'd just like to put them on the table. And I think they relate directly to our perspective. The first was the emphasis on context specificity. And I think the role that local and regional governments can play in actually helping to understand, address, and make sure that context specificity is reflected in national policy making through some of those frameworks and interlinkages that you talked about in your presentation. And the second, which was the focus on how, because I think we've spent a lot of time focusing on raising awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030, the importance of inclusive sustainable development. But I think it is really important, and I think the statistics tell us that, we need to also be focusing much more on the how. And I'm sure some of our colleagues on this panel are going to be speaking a little bit to that. So without kind of further ado, as I've said, we have an incredibly rich panel of speakers, and they bring different perspectives. Some come from a city context, some from local government associations with that wider national perspective, and some of our colleagues who have been involved both in rolling out domestically the localization agenda, but also thinking from an international perspective, from a decentralized cooperation perspective, how we can continue to support and strengthen the achievement of the SDGs. And I think collectively in their own situations have been involved in building the kinds of relationships that we see here between the UN and the panel of scientists involved in this report, thinking about bringing together those stakeholders in a national or a local context. So I'm going to ask our panelists to just think about three questions, really. The first is really, thinking about the presentations which have happened so far. How far have local and regional governments' roles and perceived priorities, challenges, and opportunities been addressed by the report? So how much do we see what we're saying as a local government community in the report? And then it would be really good if you can use the time on the panel to really pick out some of the very practical or scalable tools that have been implemented at a subnational level. So things that you're aware of that have been implemented that could really contribute to implementing the recommendations of the report and, of course, accelerating progress towards the SDGs. And then, of course, finally, and maybe just in summing up, think about any really concrete policy recommendations that you think that the report should incorporate to really help to support the local and regional governments to be able to more effectively contribute to the SDGs going forward. And we've got 5 panelists. I'm going to give everyone just 5 minutes each. And then I'm going to hand back to Emilia, and she's going to walk us through a broader discussion. So I'm going to start with Ms. Fabiana Goyenesh, who is the Director of International Relations at Montevideo. And just to remind colleagues, if you need it, there is an interpretation button that you can use. So please, Fabiana, over to you.
¿Me escuchan, verdad? Me voy a permitir hablar en mi idioma para hacerlo con más fluidez y así aprovechar el tiempo. Fue muy enriquecedora la presentación y sí, cuando escuchamos este tipo de informes expertos y ahora pensando en el foro de alto nivel y luego en la cumbre de los ODS, una los mira ya a esta altura con lentes de gobierno local, ¿no? Así como las feministas vemos con lentes violeta todo lo que estudiamos y todo lo que analizamos, me atrevo a decir que hay que ponerle un enfoque de gobierno local a todo lo que hacemos. Y en ese sentido, yendo a la primera pregunta, ¿qué tanto vemos a los gobiernos locales en el reporte? Yo creo que, y capaz sintetizo en una respuesta, la respuesta a los tres planteos, ¿no? Pero creo que es muy importante señalar cómo desde el comienzo del compromiso con los ODS en adelante, la comprensión de que el futuro y el escenario en el que nos vamos a estar desarrollando de aquí al 2030 cada vez más tiene que abarcar a los gobiernos locales, permea todo. Es decir, del 2015 en adelante empezamos viendo que las ciudades tenían un gran potencial para contribuir a alcanzar los ODS, que en ese sentido son las responsables de ejecutar muchas de estas políticas, y paso a paso, y del 2019 a esta parte, creo que se profundizó muchísimo, hemos visto que los gobiernos locales ya no solo ejecutan parte de las políticas que contribuyen a alcanzar estos objetivos, sino que deben ser considerados como tomadores de decisión, ¿no? Es decir, como actores protagónicos en todo este ecosistema. Y que sin los gobiernos locales, los ODS no se alcanzan, las metas no se cumplen. Entonces, no somos meros instrumentadores o ejecutores, sino que debemos ser parte de todo ese proceso. Y de ahí la importancia de este tipo de encuentros y de nuestra participación en este reporte. Esto quedó bien evidente, bien comprobado durante la pandemia del COVID, que los gobiernos locales fueron fundamentales. Pero además, los gobiernos locales son responsables políticos y tienen la particularidad de ser agentes de cambio y de ser el nivel de gobierno más apropiado y en mejores condiciones de articular con todos los actores. Y creo que quizá esa puede ser la oportunidad de enriquecer este informe, es de hacer un énfasis en la importancia que tenemos los gobiernos locales para poder articular con los distintos niveles de gobierno, la importancia de que todos los niveles de gobierno, que en una perspectiva multinivel esté bien permeada en el informe y en todo lo que se hace respecto a los ODS, y la importancia de la participación, de la construcción no solamente de la persecución de los objetivos y el seguimiento y la evaluación propia de cómo se alcanzan estos objetivos y estas metas, sino el análisis, el monitoreo y la construcción de la agenda junto con la sociedad civil, con la academia, con el sector privado, con todos los actores. Y ahí, una vez más, los gobiernos locales son claves. Al comienzo de la pandemia, por ejemplo, los Estados miembros reconocieron, ¿no? que no se iba a alcanzar la Agenda 2030 sin poder, es decir, no, que al paso que veníamos no se iba a alcanzar la Agenda 2030. Eso se vio en el reporte del 2019. Y ahí fue que se identificó claramente la importancia de los gobiernos locales. De las 169 metas de los ODS, hay por lo menos 100 que necesitan una acción local. Pero además, más allá de esas que la necesitan específicamente, a mí me gustaría traer algo que expresaron hoy respecto de la sinergia que hacen algunos de los objetivos, y que eso se ve mucho más en poblaciones como las mujeres, las juventudes, la población rural, y en todo eso la participación del gobierno local es crucial. Porque para alcanzar objetivos como el número 5, para avanzar en la igualdad de género, el escenario donde las grandes desigualdades y los grandes conflictos de convivencia, de discriminación, de desigualdad y violencia estructural son las ciudades. Entonces, por lo tanto, tienen un rol fundamental al momento de avanzar en políticas que mejoren en ese sentido. Como agentes del desarrollo sostenible, los gobiernos locales tienen características idóneas para avanzar de esa manera, incluso para permear las políticas nacionales, pero para construir desde abajo, con la ciudadanía, con la población, con la sociedad civil, aquellos cometidos que pueden alcanzar la Agenda 2030 en el tiempo adecuado y en el tiempo al que los estados se han comprometido. Yendo más específicamente al enfoque en la necesidad de los procesos y los mecanismos, yo creo que acá hay algo bien importante, y es que la gobernanza para la transformación, cuando se menciona en el reporte, no menciona la gobernanza multinivel, no menciona a los gobiernos locales y regionales. Yo creo que eso hay que reforzarlo, porque para no dejar nadie atrás es fundamental tanto la acción multinivel como la participación, porque alcanzar la Agenda 2030 no es cuestión de gestión, es cuestión de gobernanza. Y en esa gobernanza los gobiernos locales son protagonistas y tienen la clave, tienen la llave para poder llevar adelante los grandes desafíos que tenemos de aquí a unos pocos años al 2030. Entonces, fortalecer la gobernanza multinivel, crear un entorno institucional propicio, contribuir a consolidar una base de diálogo clara, responsable, participativa, con mucha comunicación, con mucha sensibilización, es sumamente importante. Para darle mayor contundencia a la participación de los gobiernos locales, yo creo que hay que hacer un énfasis en la importancia que los informes nacionales incorporen la visión y la información de los informes voluntarios locales, que se ha visto todo lo que pueden hacer y el detalle al que pueden llegar y que hacen una contribución fundamental. Mientras los informes nacionales voluntarios no incorporen el enfoque de los informes voluntarios locales, los informes nacionales voluntarios no van a estar completos, no van a estar rindiendo cuentas de todo lo que tienen que rendir. No está terminado. Entonces es fundamental que esa perspectiva se incorpore, es fundamental que los gobiernos locales tengan no solo participación, no solo voz, sino que se reconozcan sus procesos, su presentación de informes y que formen parte de las deliberaciones oficiales del foro político de alto nivel. Y para no extenderme más, entonces, mi recomendación concreta de política sería precisamente, por un lado, hacer mayor énfasis en la importancia de los gobiernos locales en la gobernanza y en la articulación multinivel y en la participación, y por el otro lado, que los informes voluntarios nacionales tengan el deber de incorporar los informes voluntarios locales y que los gobiernos locales tengan, durante las deliberaciones oficiales del foro político de alto nivel, una voz y una incidencia directamente representativa y que refleje la importancia del rol de los gobiernos locales para alcanzar los objetivos de esta agenda. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Fabiana. Thank you for that. And thank you for really emphasizing both sides of the role of local government and the need to see more of local government reflected in the report, and particularly around those multi-level governance and those multi-level governance linkages. I'm going to move on quickly because I'm very conscious that we're a little bit behind time. I'm going to call next to Mr. Zaid Ibrahim, who is the Executive Director for Strategy, Policy Coordination and Relations in the city of Johannesburg in South Africa. So over to you.
Good day, and thank you very much, Secretary General and everyone else on today's panel. On behalf of the City of Johannesburg, we appreciate the work and the advancement of such evidence-based and inclusive and participatory policymaking initiatives as we've just gone through in the presentation. I think, as the previous speaker has already said, and as we'll echo from Johannesburg as well, the report recognizes the importance of local adaptation but mainly at a country level. The role for local governments are arguably not emphasized enough. And I think, as we've heard previously, and as we will also emphasize, local and regional governments require more than just recognition, but also a better focus and the kind of capacitation and requirements to drive these agendas, particularly as we move towards the last few years of the Sustainable Development Goals. In the city of Johannesburg, maybe perhaps to bring some perspective in terms of where we are and how we might also respond to the key questions that have been posed to us, there are at least 3 steps of how we want to drive and take the SDGs domesticated and ensure that there is some steps to the work which we are currently finding ourselves in. And that drives us within 3 particular spaces. I think quite critical and quite obvious to everyone are issues around planning, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation. From the side of planning, we've achieved most of that. We've translated global ambitions to a local level. We are able to align it to our national plan, to our local city development strategy, the Joburg 2040 strategy, and we have brought it down to a 5-year implementation plan. So what we have done is we have improved planning, at least to accelerate the implementation or accelerate the drive to implementation of SDGs at a local level. In addition, what has been somewhat scalable, or what we can showcase and how we've been able to utilize some of this information, has been what we've developed is a new portal, a data portal for SDGs tracking. Now we are tracking 92 indicators. Some of them are broad-based, some of them look at the entire picture, because our polycentric nature of our city and the nature of development is integrated, it's intertwined, multidisciplinary, and we're trying to find an interdisciplinary way of looking at, firstly, domesticating the data, and secondly, integrating the reporting as well. More importantly, we want to make this data publicly accessible, so that we call upon our communities to hold us to account in terms of the action that we are or not taking, in terms of how we are participating in these processes, as well as driving key initiatives as well. In terms of implementation, I think that is where the challenge lies, and that's where the world is running out of time, and that is where the voice and the role of local government needs to be emphasized, and how decision-making and implementation needs to be correlated as well. So we do call upon the independent group of scientists and those who have championed this report to include more references to local and regional governments versus the broad references to local authorities or subnational governments. Within the metropolitan context as well, this can be overemphasized or emphasized or amplified even further as well. But as we mentioned, we as local and regional governments require more than recognition. We need concrete support for implementation and to be part of these decision-making processes very early on. We are constantly asked to do more with less. It's a global paradox, literally, in terms of the development sphere and discourse we find ourselves in. We need to find innovative ways of financing and our development. We also need to have funding devolved to cities to enable the crucial work of local government, how we deliver critical services of water, energy, sanitation, healthcare, and the opportunities for decent work in our cities. And in a developing or in a southern context, these things need to be balanced with maintaining what we have already and driving and leapfrogging these things or these technologies into a new era of development as well. So we need, from a policy point of view, much greater vertical alignment across the spheres or the tiers of government, and integrated widespread action, where we're looking at much more cohesive local action, more than just good news stories, but a much greater emphasis on integrated reporting. So that type of vertical alignment as a key policy action should be something that we focus on as well. In respect of how we report and how we take this forward, we call upon, again, the independent group of scientists to impress upon the high-level policy forum and our national governments our desire collectively for giving us guidance for this clear alignment, as well as to look at how local and regional governments need to be at the forefront of monitoring, reporting, implementing, and driving the SDGs at the starting or at the initial point of where the evidence of implementation can be found. Therefore, to close off from our side, again, we welcome the report. We also would like to use this opportunity to call upon our national governments and decision makers to provide that policy, a conducive policy environment at the national level for sustainable development to be driven, championed, and be decisively dealt with at local levels, as well as to ensure that local governments cannot be struggling against red tape or the bureaucratic or outdated or current methods of doing business and running cities in the hope of transition that will deliver consumption and production that is sustainable, but at the same time not dealing with the actual forces and factors that lead us to that. I hope that our submission is sufficient. Thank you very much. And on behalf of the City of Johannesburg, once again, we look to continue our collaboration, and we thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for that, Mr. Ibrahim, and thank you for, really focusing very clearly on those three areas of planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, and for not forgetting how that monitoring and evaluation becomes something that public have access to, because I think, it's very easy to sit in a meeting like this and to focus on the achievements, the planning, the processes, and forget sometimes about the important role that local and regional governments play in terms of access and engagement with our local communities as the link with those local communities. I think it was very important to bring that through. And of course, some of those calls directly on the authors of the report, and of course on our own governments, who we also really need to continue to hold to account in terms of the role of local and regional government in achieving the SDGs. I'm going to move next to Ms. Luz Amparo, who is the Director of International Relations at the City of Bogotá. So a city perspective, thank you so much. Over to you.
Muchas gracias. También voy a hablar en español. Primero que todo, agradecer a CGLU por esta oportunidad de conversar alrededor de este reporte, a los autores y a la comunidad científica, también un reconocimiento por las propuestas, por los hallazgos que están haciendo. También quiero agradecer a mis dos predecesores porque por completo suscribo lo que han planteado frente a la necesidad de darle mayor centralidad al rol de los gobiernos locales, no solo como implementadores, sino como actores políticos activos en el avance de las agendas globales de desarrollo. Pero quisiera en este muy limitado tiempo referirme a algunas recomendaciones que quería hacer frente al informe. Y muy particularmente frente a estas palancas para las transformaciones que se requieren y una condición que no veo lo suficientemente clara y que apunta también al rol que los gobiernos locales tendrían que tener en todo este análisis y en esta apuesta. Y tiene que ver con el rol de la colaboración a nivel de los distintos actores, es decir, una colaboración multiactor y también multinivel. Estamos en un momento donde de verdad no podemos esperar producir resultados distintos, pensando desde los mismos marcos, no solamente de pensamiento, sino de actuación en el ámbito multilateral también. Y en esa medida, digamos que entender que se requiere desde orillas distintas, desde el sector privado, desde la sociedad civil, desde la contribución que las universidades, la investigación puede hacer, requiere un marco de gobernanza en el que nos reconozcamos y estemos dispuestos a colaborar y a generar acción colectiva bajo una comprensión política también de las contribuciones que todas estas voces desde los distintos ámbitos pueden aportar para avanzar en las agendas globales de desarrollo. Y en esa medida creemos que estamos en un contexto bien interesante con todas estas reuniones que vamos a tener este año alrededor de la revisión de medio término de los ODS y lo que se está empezando a configurar como un pacto hacia el futuro y justamente la contribución que desde CGLU estamos haciendo alrededor del cuidado de las personas, de los gobiernos, del planeta, para avanzar desde estas voces locales y multiactor en el avance de las agendas globales de desarrollo. En ese sentido también quisiera como mencionar y hacer un par de recomendaciones como nos estaban pidiendo a nivel de política pública. Por una parte, Colombia tiene un índice de pobreza multidimensional que justamente recoge esas sinergias, no solo las reconoce, las cuantifica y las hace muy evidentes en la forma como entendemos que la contribución desde salud, desde educación, desde equidad de género, desde distintos ámbitos de incidencia en la política social contribuyen a la reducción de la pobreza justamente. Entonces, una recomendación es que se fijen en estos esquemas de medición que también permiten recoger de manera institucional, de hecho, los aportes que desde los gobiernos locales hacemos en el avance de medición de bienestar distinto a la pobreza monetaria, por ejemplo. Entonces, es un instrumento concreto que permite generar una visibilización clara de estas sinergias entre distintos ODS para medir el bienestar y el avance en pobreza, en equidad y en desigualdades. Lo otro que queremos proponer también como recomendación de política es nuestro sistema de cuidado a nivel local, nuestro sistema distrital de cuidado, que desde una respuesta de prestación de servicios simultáneos para las personas que cuidan y las cuidadoras, las personas que son cuidadas y las personas que cuidan, que son mayoritariamente mujeres, se avanza en esquemas de formación, de generación de ingresos, de prestación de salud también, y allí se abordan ODS como el ODS 4, ODS 5, el ODS asociado a trabajo digno, el 8, y todo esto desde una perspectiva también muy local de distribución espacial y de tener el cuidado como un ordenador del territorio en contextos urbanos. Entonces creo que Colombia y Bogotá tienen mucho que referenciar allí y sí llamar de nuevo por una comprensión compleja del sistema de actores que son relevantes para el avance de esto y de la voluntad política que se requiere también para una de estas recomendaciones que están haciendo asociada a las decisiones basadas en evidencia y en la ciencia. No basta solamente con que la ciencia produzca estas evidencias y estas orientaciones, se requiere de una voluntad política muy importante para dejarse influenciar, permear y tomar decisiones desde allí en la dirección correcta. Entonces, no minimizar el componente político para avanzar en la adopción de este perfil de gestión pública en todos los niveles, teniendo en lo local un actor realmente sustantivo. Eso es todo desde Bogotá, agradeciendo nuevamente esta contribución de este reporte y muy atentas a seguir participando en estas discusiones. Muchas gracias.
Thanks very much, Ms. Amparo, and thanks for really bringing us back to that care function and the role of local government in that provision of care across our communities and how that then relates back to achieving the SDGs. And I think that's a very important kind of message that's been coming very consistently from the global local government community. I have two other speakers, so we are definitely going to have some time to move into a discussion. I'm sorry, we are running slightly short of time. I'm going to come next to Mercedes Sanchez Salido, who's the Subdirector of International Relations and Cooperation at the Spanish Federation of Municipalities and has been working again on issues around the SDGs for a number of years. Mercedes, over to you.
Pues yo también me voy a permitir hablar en mi lengua, en el castellano, porque me va a ser más fácil intentar no extenderme tanto, ¿no? Muchas gracias, Lucy, por la palabra y sobre todo gracias Emilia, por convocar este encuentro. Gracias y sobre todo me alegro muchísimo de que esta pantalla esté llena de colores y de mujeres diversas, ¿no? Porque yo creo que al final, como decíais, los ODS se tienen ahora, que siempre tuvieron un carácter feminista, pero creo que en esta década de acción y en estos 8 años que quedan para cumplimentarlos se tienen que las acciones cubrir y reforzar de ese color morado, ¿no? Porque es verdad que la situación actual en la que vivimos, el planeta, en los últimos 2 años, año y medio, en el contexto europeo en el que yo habito y muchas de vosotras también, también hay unas oleadas, ¿no? que van contra el negacionismo de la Agenda 2030, cada vez con un impacto mayor. Nosotros hemos tenido unas elecciones locales hace 3 días, con lo que ha habido una importancia. No, quiero decir que también eso tiene que ver con la Agenda 2030, con la democracia, con los valores básicos, ¿no? De igualdad de oportunidades para toda persona y todo territorio. Y yo creo que en estos años que quedan y los informes de este año que tenemos la oportunidad en septiembre en esa asamblea hablar de progreso, también tenemos que atender, ¿no? Sobre la necesidad de fortalecer las democracias en todos los territorios. Y ahí la autonomía local, la descentralización, creo que son imprescindibles también a tener en cuenta, ¿no? Esto no iba mucho con la pregunta, Lucy, pero sí que creo que contextualmente sí que está totalmente alineado, ¿no? Es decir, tenemos que abordar la importancia de fortalecer la Agenda 2030 y para eso todos los actores comprometidos y sus redes tenemos que estar reflejados en informes tan importantes como este que se hace cada 4 años. Consideramos que, bueno, gracias Astra por la presentación, súper importante y clarificadora, ¿no? A mí me gustaría primero, suscribo todo lo dicho por mis compañeras, porque no puede ser de otra manera. Venimos del mundo local y venimos defendiendo la localización y el trabajo de los gobiernos locales para alcanzar la Agenda 2030. Yo creo que ya es el momento, ¿no? Yo creo que ha habido una evolución sin duda que nadie puede negar, exponencial de la contribución y el compromiso de los gobiernos locales con el cumplimiento de la Agenda 2030 frente a otros actores también nacionales, o sea, gobiernos nacionales, y yo creo que eso se tiene que ver reflejado en este tipo de informes. Por tanto, sí que por lo que hemos podido ver, se hace referencia a la contribución de los gobiernos locales para la consecución de los ODS, pero yo creo que deberíamos ir más allá, ¿no? E incluso ver la posibilidad, no sé si es posible, de que haya un capítulo específico, ¿no? Sobre la contribución de los gobiernos locales, a la que ha tenido y sobre todo el papel transformador que va a tener y que tiene que cumplir de aquí al año 2030 o al menos al siguiente informe de seguimiento, ¿no? Porque están los 6 capítulos y los 6 capítulos en los que habéis hablado hacen referencia, ¿no? a cómo acelerar y contribuir y alcanzar los ODS. Pero en cada uno de esos capítulos debería haber un subcapítulo sobre la contribución y la especificidad de contribución de los gobiernos locales, de cómo lo hacemos y cómo lo podemos hacer. Bueno, esto es, como me habéis permitido contribuir y ser un debate abierto, lo pongo encima de la mesa, ¿no? Porque creo que solo a través de la visibilidad se nos reconoce a veces. Y la visibilidad tiene que ser clara. Nosotros, un ejemplo muy corto, en 2 minutos concluyo, pero en España hicimos un informe voluntario, el informe nacional voluntario, el primero, y se trabajó desde la Federación Española de Municipios y Provincias para que hubiera un capítulo específico sobre gobiernos locales, porque la idea del gobierno era introducir que éramos un actor más, ¿vale? Pero no somos un actor más, somos un actor principal y por tanto creo, y eso significó un punto de inflexión a la hora de extender, y voy a contestar parte del segunda pregunta, a cómo los gobiernos locales españoles, yo diría que el 90% de los gobiernos locales españoles tienen incorporado ya en su ADN y pensamiento en las últimas elecciones que el plan municipal tenía que incorporar la transversalización y la localización de la Agenda 2030 y de la nueva Agenda Urbana. Por tanto, y eso es gracias a que, ¿no? Toda esa visibilización de nuestras contribuciones. Por tanto, creo que a nivel global merecería la pena también poder incorporarlo. Señalaste, Astra, el tema de la interconexión. Creo que eso es fundamental y es algo que desde los gobiernos locales, al principio de una manera no tan pensada, pero ahora sí que totalmente estructurada, lo venimos haciendo, porque al final, en cualquier gobierno local, sus planes locales de actuación, sus planes de ciudad, estaban alineados sin darse cuenta con la Agenda 2030. Por lo tanto, nuestra transformación y nuestro paso de los planes locales de planificación urbana y de planificación de ciudad a su alineación con la Agenda 2030 ha sido relativamente fácil. Y, por ejemplo, nosotros en la CEM impulsamos hace 4 años la red de entidades locales para la Agenda 2030 desde esta perspectiva, es decir, desde una coherencia de política, desde entender que ninguna planificación de ciudad podía no entender que los 17 objetivos de desarrollo sostenible están interconexionados y desde ahí hacer tu plan de ciudad. ¿Qué ciudad quiero basada en esos 17 objetivos? Y creo que esa interconexión no se hace tanto a nivel nacional. Yo creo que hay que poner en valor que desde lo local sí que lo hacemos, más que se hace a nivel global. Hablando de la capacitación,
Hemos perdido el sonido.
Oh, I think we're losing you, Mercedes.
Ahora os escucho. Ahora me escucháis, perdonadme. Quería ir tan rápida. Decía, en la palanca de capacitación, creo que desde CGLU y desde muchas organizaciones mundiales hemos impulsado el intercambio de conocimiento, el desarrollo de formación. Eso también tiene que estar reflejado. A nivel nacional, no hay planes nacionales de funcionarios públicos nacionales para que entiendan e incorporen a su trabajo diario la Agenda 2030. En lo local lo hemos hecho, por tanto tenemos que estar, se tiene que ver y somos palanca también y somos aceleradores para la consecución de la Agenda 2030. Eso también lo quería decir, ¿no? Es decir, no solamente somos actores, como han dicho mis compañeras, claves, actores que tenemos que tomamos decisiones, que planificamos, que implementamos y que rendimos cuentas, sino que también a su vez tenemos otro sombrero que es que somos en sí mismos aceleradores de la Agenda 2030. Por lo tanto, eso se tiene que reconocer. Termino con una cuestión que yo había puesto.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe just wrap up if you can, Mercedes, just we have one more speaker still to come.
Thank you very much.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Finished.
Thank you, and very clear, very clear, a very strong kind of message. Thank you, Mercedes, in terms of the role of local government as an accelerator, but also the importance of visibility. And so I'm going to come on to our final speaker. It's Dr. Nela Akrimi, who is the manager of networks and strategy and the director of CILG at VNG International, based in the Netherlands. Over to you, Nela.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Thanks, everybody, for organizing this, Emilia and your wonderful team. I'm so happy to see everybody today. And also, thank you, Astra, for your presentation and for giving us a glimpse of what's going on in the report. Speaking last, so I don't want to repeat what the other colleagues have said, because I totally agree on everything said. I just want to share with you 3 ideas as a reaction to the presentation of the report, also what I read about the report 2019-2023. And I find also the same also with my colleagues before me, is that there is local governments and regional governments are not mentioned enough in the report. And that's a pity, because if we are talking about transformation and game-changing intervention, I believe this is really the time to acknowledge the importance of the role of local and regional government. Lucy has mentioned it. I'm part of an association of municipality enhancing SDGs in the Netherlands, but also abroad through international cooperation programs. And we do that as part of decentralized cooperation mechanisms of sharing knowledge between sister organizations with Association of Municipalities and Municipalities. And we do see it in practice that what is happening in territories is the concrete aspect we are looking for in terms to change, this pattern when it comes to implementing SDGs and really make sure that it has been boosted because we all agree we are not doing well. And we say we, because it's not only a matter of the UN, we as a collective effort are not doing well with SDGs. And because of this collective responsibility, I'm really pledging here for the importance of looking at local government 3, what I found, I came up with the 3 Ps, by the way. The first one is the P of perception. When I look at the report, 2019, which has been taken also by 2023, what is mentioned, for example, is to call upon national governments for translating SDGs to the local level. While the local level, local and regional level, they do have also a say on that. Of course, in what we call a circular governance, meaning that all the levels of governance are connected, also with media, with civil society, with academia, but local governments do have a space in shaping what also Emilia said in the beginning, but not only implementing. That perception, we hope that it comes out a bit different in the reports. Perception of acknowledgement. I think involving local government will also make this perception understand the better role that could be played to change the game of intervention. And another P here is the process. In your presentation, but also in the reports, be it in 2019 or 2023, it's about accelerating. It's about also managing innovation, the emergency of it, the acceleration and the stabilization of it. But it's all happening in territories. This is not abstract. It's all happening in cities, but also in rural areas. And the territorial approach for sustainable development, it's really important to make it be brought really ahead in the way we rethink SDGs in order to boost them. And that territorial development approach will bring us to also what has been mentioned by Emilia in the beginning, the local public services. It will bring us also how to monitor and how we evaluate, but not in, because one of the issues we notice when we work on SDGs at the local level in our international cooperation program, as much as we try to make it, concrete, it does become concrete only when we have it at the local level, only when we talk about inclusiveness, about participation for democratic processes of elections, or when we talk about creating jobs for young men and women in equal, terms. So the territorial approach is really important, and I really hope that comes out a bit more in all those, ideas of interlinkages, and also the entry points that you have mentioning for transformation. The last P is the power of action. At the end of the day, we are not going to change those perceptions and also make sure that the process is really seen for it is if there's no actions for it. And one of the actions, as you mentioned in the presentation, is the key actions for driving transformation change is national plans. If I recall well in your presentation, there was national plans with a global commitment. One of the recommendations I would love to see is also local plans with a global commitment, not only national plans. And this does make sense because UCLG World Secretariat, so many members of UCLG associations of local governments worldwide have been working on the voluntary local report for SDG and also the VSR, the voluntary subnational. So that could be definitely a good base also for local plans, with a global commitment. I believe at the end, and I want to take too long, Lucy, I believe at the end is that the time is really there to have the shift of pattern, the shift also of paradigm in policy making by recognizing local government in this multilateralism effort, but also make it more part of all this, phases of transformation you mentioned, and make sure also we see that translated in this transforming efforts we are working on. And thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Naila. So I'm going to hand back now to Emilia. And I think, that sums up really beautifully many of the comments and the points that were made in this session. And I think, these issues around perception, process, local plans, but really crucially, I think that the time is now that we need a different kind of way of looking at how we integrate local and regional governments better into the local, national, global, and international architecture in terms of moving and being in a position to be able to move towards the kind of acceleration we know we've got to see, because we know if we keep doing what we've always been doing, we're going to get the same results. So we actually really do need to think about how we do something different in terms of being able to see that acceleration happen. Emilia, over to you. And thank you again to all of the wonderful panelists.
Well, thank you very much, Lucy, and thank you to all the speakers. I think they have provided, of course, very, very interesting inputs. Before giving the floor to Dr. Asha Pearson, who has been following the inputs provided by the local government practitioners, I wanted to share with you a reflection that was triggered by your presentations and the one introducing the findings of the report. I think at the end of the day, the draft report is really highlighting the same kind of axes and entry points, and the one that our local and regional governments are working towards. But there are some pieces that are missing, which is what we are trying to address at local level. I mean, if we have been talking for a very long time about capacity building, about sustainable formats, about finance, about equality, what is it, and governance, of course, why is it that we are not seeing the shifts that we need to see? And this constituency, local and regional governments, inspired also by the common agenda and by the work that we have done together with civil society, have identified two additional issues that we need to look at and that we need to use as a prism to influence the axes that have been discussed also in the report. And that is the place of the commons in local service provision, the place of the commons in financing, and the place of trust in building institutions that will be capable to promote the type of transformation that we want to make. And I think it's really important in our narrative and in our discussions towards the sustainable development goals. We need to make sure that we bring the notion that there are choices, political and human choices to be made. That is not only about the disasters and the realities that we need to manage, but that there are real choices to be made, and that equality is a choice. And how you finance things and how you build the architecture is a choice. And I think this constituency, local and regional governments, they are the biggest governments of all. There are many more local and regional governments in the world than national governments. The potential of transformation is enormous. If we don't manage to transmit this to this report, but also to the rest of the process, then it will be a collective failure. And I think it is important, and I do hope that scientists start to reflect on that, because it will not be possible to bring science to policy making only by the mere power of data. We humans have proven that we overlook data and we ignore data very, very often. And we only need to look at health, the health examples that we know, tobacco and sugar and all of these kinds of things. Data is not enough for human beings. And so I think the issue of reclaiming the commons and putting trust in a different space of the agenda will be very critical if we want also the Sustainable Development Goals Summit to rekindle, I think was the expression, the hope of this agenda. And we agree as a constituency, it's extremely hopeful agenda. So we want to make sure that we are going with that message to the United Nations, that there are ways to change the ties, and there are ways to shift policies. So unless there is any other inputs that maybe the speakers want to make, or other reflections that colleagues that are attending would like to make, I'm looking attentively. Please do use your raised hands. Unless that is the case, I would go to Asha Pearson, but I am giving it a couple of seconds more to see if there is anybody else that would like to say something. If not, we will go to Asha. Thank you very much, Asha, for joining us. I hope you couldn't be there for the whole time, but the presentation of the report, because you've been there. So you have been able to hear most of the inputs from the local and regional government constituency. We are very grateful that you are with us. The floor is yours for some reflections. And I want to highlight that you have participated in this panel. Of course, you are part of the panel, but you are also research director and deputy director of the Stockholm Environment Institute. That's an important fact to know as well. Welcome, Asha.
Thank you very much. And my apologies, I could not join you for the first part, but I am sure that Astra gave a very good overview of the report. This also meant, of course, I couldn't hear all the interesting conversation in the first hour, but I'm very glad I heard some reflections and feedback from the last 3 or 4 speakers, Mr. Ibrahim, Ms. Amparo, and Dr. Akrimi. So what I heard, just to summarize a little bit, was the call for more vertical alignment, to recognize the role of local and regional government as accelerators, to recognize the role of local government as shapers of policy, not just takers or implementers, and overall this need for visibility and recognition. And I think hearing this and now reflecting back on the work we have done on this report, it is of course a very unsatisfactory report to work on, because there is so much to analyze, to assess, to synthesize. This is a global sustainable development report, but hearing you and also knowing that the scientific evidence out there and all the reports, we also need, I think, a local sustainable development report, really capturing all the experiences and learnings from at the local and regional level. Also very interesting for me has been to learn about also looking at all the SDGs and the targets, how many of those that actually local and regional governments are capable of taking meaningful action on, in terms of having the legal mandate and also having the sort of fiscal tools. So I think it's very clear that local and regional government is a key actor in the SDG context. With more resources, of course, it would have been very nice to highlight and extract and elaborate on calls to action, targeted to local regional government, but also to the private sector, to civil society, and to youth, because we need all these constituencies, of course, to be part of this journey we have ahead the next 7 years. I think going back to the reports, I hope that it's still clear that the local level is recognized as indeed an accelerator or driver of action. I think some of the examples we pick up on, especially innovation, it's often at the local level that exciting new practices are tested, whether it's technological innovation or more social innovation. But also, it's quite clear to us when we looked at the 6 entry points and what are the key interventions and shifts needed, then it is also quite concentrated at the national level, because we are talking about things like carbon pricing, universal health access, things that are typically in the domain of national government. So So I think with that, we have maybe gravitated towards speaking to national governments and member states, also because they have, in a way, commissioned this report. But I do think a very good suggestion was made that, you know, this call to action we make for member states to develop transformation frameworks and to develop these national plans. We would love to see that also, you know, local governments presenting these transformation plans or acceleration frameworks, challenging also the national level. And some specific things I could see based on our report that could be maybe highlighted in that sort of commitment and that show of leadership in terms of setting out more decisively on these transformations. Just wanted to raise 4 things. One is to show indeed that local government, regional government can be ahead on that S-curve that Astra showed you. I know many examples where local government have been indeed daring to test new things and also anticipating impediments and problem solving. For example, now in the energy transition, we know that at the local level, difficult trade-offs between building out new renewable power, maybe a wind farm. Some very solutions have been found at the local level. How can we compensate, for example, the communities affected and make it into a win-win situation? So show how the local level is ahead on the S-curve. Another, I think, key thing to highlight is how can local government, regional government lead and inspire other actors on resolving conflicts and maximizing synergies, so recognizing those interlinkages that the reports highlight. I have fellow scientists here in Sweden who've worked with local, I think 6 municipalities here doing these systematic inventories of SDG interlinkages, and they felt it was much easier actually to work at the local level compared with when they apply these tools at the national level, because there is easier to collaborate, there is less kind of turf mentality between sector ministries, for example. So that's another good, I think, learning experience for others. The third one, accountability. This is something we raised in the report. We feel that it's generally, we have very weak accountability mechanisms in the SDG framework, for example, compared with how the discussions now go in the climate space and accountability for setting net zero targets, for example. And here I think also it's a really, local government has a really important role in sort of channeling what citizens need and want in terms of quality of life at the local level. I can imagine that we as citizens sort of express different needs and wants to our local governments compared with our national governments. So I think that's also really important to convey, to be that channel for what citizens expect to see in terms of making progress on the SDGs. Finally, we do make a call to action on working more with science, because what we see is that the scientific community in general is very interested and committed to the SDGs. There has been an explosion in the number of publications and science-based tools, but we as scientists are sometimes very bad at reaching out and bridging the gaps to policy and practice, making these tools kind of user-friendly and meaningful. So, but I do see a lot of interest. So I hope that also many of you representing local governments here on this call are already working with the local universities in your respective cities. And I think that's something we could really, both sides, science and policy and practice, could really sort of meet in the middle to a greater extent. But yeah, to finish off, thank you very much for sharing these reflections. Extremely valuable to hear as we get closer to the SDG Summit. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for these important reflections as well. From our side, it's encouraging to hear that you know firsthand that sometimes there are barriers that are easier to overcome at local and regional government level, and that is what we're saying as well as a constituency, that we are very attached to subsidiarity, doing things at the level of the people that is going to be affecting most, and it is subsidiarity goes both ways, right? There are things that need to be done at national level, and I think that the call that you are making in the report is a very strong and good call. But there are other things that need to be done at other spheres, and that entails decisions from the national governments, but also the international community as to what kind of capacities, what kind of competencies are you giving to that other sphere of government? It is the same kind of responsibility that local and regional governments need to have also when ensuring accountability and community building, right? So I think that is part of the reflection that we need to make. Also, probably for the next report, and as we work towards the summit for the future. And I wanted to share with the group and highlight. You know, we do every year. We do this localization report that we bring to the high-level political forum. We do one of those every year. And this year, obviously, we are going to be focusing on SDG 11 because for us, SDG 11 is not only the only SDG we have. No, I'm joking. It's just that it was a very big fight to go there. It's not only that very specific SDG that is addressed to cities, but it is also, from our perspective, an SDG that influences the achievement of everything else. And this year, in the report that we are bringing to the high-level political forum, we're going to cover SDG 11 through different entry points, which, from our perspective, are extremely relevant. And some of those entry points go from a specific thing to a much bigger thing. And one of those examples is, for instance, the importance of strategic planning, for instance. Yes, indeed, strategic planning is extremely important, but this is a strategic planning with a perspective on feminism, on equality, on sustainability. This is why we say it is important, specifically important to the achievement of the rest of the SDGs. We are also going to be focusing on housing, how relevant it is to have affordable housing for all, and so forth. So we would, I mean, somehow want to make sure that this also inspires your work, and that you use that kind of reporting as an inspiration for the future work of your report in the coming years. There are annual reports that we do there that gather also cases from different perspectives, from different experiences, and although sometimes we don't have all of the quantitative indicators that we would like to have. We have many, but not always. There is a qualitative wealth on information around those reports that I hope can be very useful. Colleagues, I'm still looking around if there are any hands. If not, Eva, do you want to say that out loud?
Thanks, Emilia. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Please do introduce yourself, because I didn't. And then I will give the floor to Neila.
Okay, thanks, Emilia. Buenas tardes to everyone. I'm Eva Baños de Guisasola, and I'm advisor on SDGs, Global Agendas and Climate at CMR, platformer. So we are the European section of UCLG, and I'm very grateful that we can take part in this roundtable around the screen, because it is really needed to link the work that scientists are doing with the work that the local authorities are doing. And it's a very unique opportunity. It doesn't happen all the time. So thank you very much for the organizers and also for the scientists to really, share this with us, because it's the same challenge, but from different points of view. And it's very good that we need to talk together. Coming back also to what you just mentioned, Emilia, the SDGs report, as Emilia mentioned, UCLG has coordinated the large exercise to report on what associations are doing on SDGs implementation. And we, as the European section, have already produced a report. It's nearly finalized, so I will share it with the Global Task Force in a few days. We will also have an online version, but the interesting part of this exercise is not only the findings of the SDGs implementation at the local level, but it's also that we have managed to collect 200 examples from our members' associations. This is really unique. It doesn't happen all the time, because sometimes we claim for the collection of best practices. Sometimes we have difficulties in collecting or finding them, but it just came very easily. So it shows the need from the members' associations to share what they're doing with the rest of the world. So this is a very valuable piece of information that I'll be happy to share with you, Emilia, and you can distribute it further. But this is also a very useful tool that other sections can share and use. And it would also be very interesting for the scientific community to see what the local level is doing in terms of policy at the local level. So I will be very happy to share with you. And then we'll also be attending the HLPF in July. And we have also a series of side events. And one more point is that maybe the Europeans around the screen know it already, but the European Union has already launched the first European review on the implementation of SDGs. So I will be also sharing this information through the Global Task Force, but this is the first time that the European, as a whole body, not the Commission only, is that all the institutions, they are assessing what has been the progress on SDGs for the last 10 years. So they have really assessed it, P by P. So it's really an interesting document. And we met with Commissioner Jutta Urpilainen, who introduced us this report. And she will be present also at the HLPF, and she will be holding a side event on this EU report on the 19th of July. So I will be sharing all this with you, Emilia, and please be happy to respond to any questions you may have. And you can also contact me through email. Thank you very much, Emilia. And thanks for this opportunity to share views with the scientists and local authorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva, for all those efforts to, to concentrate and coordinate our actions also at European level, and ensuring that interlocution, which is very, very important to all of us. Neila.
Thank you, Emilia. Very quickly, I want to react to the call of Asa at the end when she mentioned about the role of universities and scientists and local government. Local government have been always federating, those partnership and efforts, and this is something that we do domestically, but also in international cooperation programs. So when it comes to strategic planning or inclusive governance, or even climate change and water, sanitation, all those topics, it's always a common effort between local government and universities, and there's so many examples of that sectoral collaboration. So actually the relationship between scientists and local governments has been always strong, and we are very happy that it's also facilitated here, because I think together we'll be able, hopefully, to push for that, change of paradigm, to be able to be much more closer to effective, SDGs. I wanted to tell you that.
Well, thank you very much, Neila. What I would argue is that certainly science is very close to the collective action, so to the organized constituency of local and regional governments, just as civil society is. I think it is increasingly more present at the local and regional government level, but it's certainly not where it should be. And the reason that it is not where it should be is also a part of the model, right? We need to understand that the governance models that we answer everywhere in the world, global north and global south, is not fit for testing or for improvising or for analyzing. In fact, the governance model, we are calling for it to be able to test more, to be more of a lab kind of setting, to learn. That governance should also be about learning. But at the end of the day, our governance structures are quite obsolete. The rules that our local and regional governments need to obey by are very limiting in terms of flexibility. And we only need to see at the COVID experience when local and regional governments around the world were innovating, creating new services, etc. And that has resulted in a backlash also in decentralization, and some re-centralized policies have emerged. So that is a conversation also that we honestly need to have. And I really like that this conversation is also triggering that kind of exchange, because it does give a truthful picture of where we are. I don't see any other hands. I think we could do 1 more hour in discussions, and I'm sure we will get a lot of feedback. Something to think about with you, Asha, and your colleagues, how we can make sure that we can link with the work that we are doing, our research work as well, with many of your colleagues in academia, but happy to explore possibilities around that as well. Who knows? I think we really seriously need to think about it. Thank you in any case for being here. And I would be very grateful, Astra, if I understand it would be you providing some closing remarks as well. Astra, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Emilia, and thank you to OSA for joining, and to all the speakers for the really rich discussion. And I'm glad that OSA was here to respond to some of the questions that were raised, representing the independent group of scientists. I know that we're just about out of time, so I'll be short, but this was really a good conversation and a good meeting. And I think there were several comments that referred to the process of implementing the SDGs and the process of engaging with science and strengthening the science policy interface, because that is one of the objectives of the Global Sustainable Development Report, to bring science and evidence together in support of decision makers, in support of policy. And these types of meetings and conversations are a very important part of that in terms of science hearing from decision makers in terms of what is needed to guide some of the decisions, and to even gather new evidence that can be brought into the conversation about science for the SDGs, and also to communicate some of the findings in ways that are useful for accelerating progress, for moving along the S-curve, for tackling the interlinkages and the entry points. So this is really enriching, not only moving toward the SDG Summit this September, but in the trajectory of the Global Sustainable Development Report, which is written every 4 years, and builds toward trying to respond to a lot of these needs in different contexts. So very useful to hear from you, and to know how the science community can respond to the needs of local government. Hopefully, as Osa was saying, this is a global report. Hopefully it can be used to then advocate toward national governments to create the kind of enabling environment that's needed for local governments to really accelerate on some of the innovations and ideas that you're all so aware need to be taking place, and hopefully that type of an approach can be taken and partnerships made. But the report will launch officially in September. There will be a glossy version complete, and hopefully you can all access that and use it in your work. Certainly we'll be focusing on dissemination after the launch, and local governments would be an important part of that. So thank you to UCLG, thank you Emilia and all colleagues for the opportunity for the GSDR to be presented and discussed today.
Thank you, Astra. Lucy, some wrap-up comments from our side as organized constituency under the global task force. Anything we need to consider for our participation in the high-level political forum?
I mean, I think many of the things from my side have definitely been covered. I think the need for us to continue to engage and maybe to deepen that relationship so that when we maybe come to the next report, we can actually look a bit more closely at the role of local and regional governments as an accelerating kind of partner for achieving the SDGs. I certainly think that that is definitely something that we would like to explore with you in more detail, and to maybe find good ways of opening up some of those channels with you so that in those 4 years between now and the next report, we can make sure that we keep you in touch with what we're doing so that you know a little bit more about the work of local and regional government and maybe vice versa. And I think, you know, the other thing for me is always, you know, really capturing some of the examples and some of the stories. And I think, you know, that has been certainly one of the things on this call, you know, practical examples of what local and regional governments are already doing. And also where we could do more, because I think, you know, there is a very, very strong commitment at the local and regional government level to be doing more. And I think we really do want to step up and be, yes, of course, innovating, but also more fundamentally making sure that we're delivering and making sure that we're not losing sight of the communities that we're serving as well. And I think that that's a really important kind of part of the Leave No One Behind agenda. So, I mean, I think it was such a rich discussion. There's almost too many things to touch on, but I have to touch on this one thing, which I think is really crucial. And I think also perhaps requires a bit more of a kind of scientific review, is of course the whole financing agenda, because we know how critical that is in terms of actually being able to make any of these aspirations that we all have a possibility. So I think, you know, that's also something which we don't want to lose sight of. Governance, yes, decision making, absolutely, but also let's not forget the financing pillar, which is so crucial. What a great discussion, and thank you, everybody.
Yeah, looking at finance from a different perspective, I think that's where we need to be heading. I mean, I think we are beyond the discussion on the percentage, which is still important. The percentage of sub-national finance is extremely low, but we are beyond that. It's the kind of investment. What are we investing in? I think you are absolutely right. And let us hope that in this upcoming summit in Paris, there are some discussions around us. And I know that some of us are starting to move to seek ways, whether maybe what kind of international panel could help us deliver that message. So I think you're absolutely right. If there is one thing, I know that the report is going to be presented, and so that there is literally very, very little that we would be able to change there, if anything. But there's one, I can understand why local governments are perceived as implementers mostly. I can understand it, the way that the world looks now, and is something that I can understand. A system like the United Nations, but also the international community, keep feeding this idea. The part that I don't understand is why systematized efforts to contribute to international agendas are not acknowledged. Systematized efforts by local and regional governments. And so if there is anything that I could put in there, it would be the voluntary local reviews and the voluntary subnational reviews. I think they are so critical because they embody this effort by local and regional governments and their associations to ensure that the interconnection between the SDGs is guaranteed. And it is what Mercedes from the Spanish Federation was saying. It has been the tool that we have been able to use to identify, to make local and regional governments embrace the SDG agenda as their own, and to make them realize how linked their agenda was with the global one and vice versa. So if there is one sentence I could put in there, it would be the reference to voluntary local reviews and the voluntary subnational reviews. And let us hope we we are successful to bring all of these voices to the high-level political forum. Thank you to the colleagues of DESA, to all the colleagues from the cities around the world and from the associations that are with us. Thank you very much, Astra, Lucy, Lotta, and Ayara, for all the help that you always provide. And thank you to the UCLG team and to the Global Task Force colleagues that are with us today. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Keep well.